The PlayStation 2 was the #1 DVD player ever sold, and also, it played a lot of great video games. Before I cover my top 10 PlayStation 2 games, I thought I might tell you about some games that are flawed, but are a heck of a lot of fun if you just give them half a chance. I am the Game Collector, and this is Second Opinion Games, and today I talk about some PlayStation 2 games that I like to play.
Second Opinion Games.
Luxor, it's one of those match 3 games. You have a podium at the bottom of the screen, you launch your balls upwards towards the top of the screen with a winding path of balls, and then you try to get them to smack into each other. Trying to create combos and collect power-ups is the entire name of the game here, and there are a crap ton of maps to go through, so if you want a challenge, this is definitely your game, because it's one of those ones that are easy to pick up, hard to put down. One of its biggest problems is the fact that it feels like a cell phone game, because it is a cell phone game. But I'm completely fine with that because there doesn't seem to be any actual issues with the game itself. It plays exactly how you think it would, and it doesn't act anything different. So at least you know what you're getting here. Also, it tends to be one of those bargain bin games, so if you're in for a good deal, you cannot go wrong with this one. But it really lacks on personality, so for that, I think you might go with MTV Celebrity Deathmatch was a video game based on a fairly popular TV show where you would have claymation celebrities beating the crap out of each other and have over-the-top finishing moves. This is a total button beater, and most of these celebrities, I bet a lot of people don't remember anymore, but it doesn't mean it's not a lot of fun. Still seeing Mr. T beat up anyone is hilarious, and you can finally live your life as Ron Jeremy, even though that sounds really gross and full of STDs. Heck, you could even make your own character, however the character limitations are very, very slim, which means you could just make a handful of people that sort of look alike. I wish you could set up different special moves too, or maybe make it completely customizable, but I guess we just weren't ready for that with these tiny memory cards that the PlayStation 2 had. And after you hear the announcers say something stupid so many times, you're just ready to put it off to the side and maybe play a game that makes you think just a little bit more. Boombastic was a dice-rolling puzzle game where you roll dice to get them to explode. If you put 2 number 2s right next to each other, they will get infuriated, charge up for a little while, and then explode. If there's a number 3 in the path of the explosion, well, maybe that will set off a slight chain reaction. If there's a number 1, it will also explode because you can only have 1 dice line up with a number 1, which doesn't make any sense, which means you need a chain reaction to set off that number. So when you start playing, your brain is going to be completely confused on just what the heck is going on here on this grid, which is the way I usually like to play. There's also an adventure mode, which will have you running and dodging enemies, but that gets way too strenuous for my brain, and I'd rather just play this to see how I get a top score. There's not a whole lot going on here, and one confusing thing to me is the fact that why is this game called Boombastic and not something like Dice? DICE, DNA Integrated Cybernetic Enterprises, which means that the game's name is an acronym made up of another acronym, DNA. That makes no sense, but that's okay because the gameplay here also makes no sense as you pilot around giant transforming vehicles and smash everything to dust in what looks like an extremely awkwardly playing beat-em-up style game. You collect little orbs, which then later you can get upgrades and whatnot. It's a total mindless hack and slash beat-em-up, at least at first, because then as you move on through the game, it's also a racing game, because keep in mind, your characters can't transform themselves, which means if you run into the walls, you will jump out of them. This is really annoying in a racing game, and it's a shame that it's here. However, there's a lot of different characters to choose from to complete these missions, which means you just have to pick the right one for the job, because some can move faster and have better handling. Because this wasn't designed from the start to be a racing game, the maps aren't designed to be taking very fast, which means you want to take your time on them and then slam on the brakes and corner hard. Now you think you could pick a character that can just turn into a flying machine and bypass the entire map. However, that's just not gonna work. They sort of made it so you couldn't cheat your way through the game here. The beat 'em up parts are kind of fun, and the racing is kind of fun, which makes this kind of a good game, and also one of those cheap bargain bin games. As far as racing games go, this one's silly, so how about check out another silly racing game? Iridium Runners is a racing game thought up by 6-year-olds because you're not in any fancy cars. No, you are quite literally just running around a track. Now, if I was running, I would have a lot more control over my body than these characters do. So they just run. That's the game. Oh, hey, there's some jumping involved here too, and there's even speed boost things on the ground. I think if you were running and you just came across that treadmill moving really fast, as you were running over it, I don't know if it would give you quite the speed boost that this game thinks it would give you. Also, you have a little item thing that you could pick. You could set it up to give you different boosts and whatnot. I like being more aggressive with one that just shoots down everyone and tries to kill people, and it's really difficult at first trying to juggle between switching up all of the items and making the fast-paced jumps that you need to do in order to succeed at this game, but once you get the hang of it, you'll be a winner in no time. But I think I'd rather be playing a racing game with actual vehicles, and for that, I'll turn to Whiteout, a snowmobile racing game with over-the-top announcers. I feel like every racing game in this generation had over-the-top announcers, and you can even do some flips here and there, but not required. What is required, well, at least for submissions, is flying through flaming rings and collecting as many points as possible. If you do this, well, maybe you could unlock one of the many unlockables in the game, which there are a ton. You could also pick up some nitrous, because setting off nitrous oxide on a snowmobile sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? Well, probably not. The maps here are somewhat creative and with a lot of winding turns. So if you enjoy a good snowmobile racer, you can't go wrong with this one. But maybe this is just too fast-paced for you and you'll want to slow things down to an absolute crawl, if not standstill. Well, for that, I guess I'm gonna have to go with Raw Danger. A game that you can play as the world's worst waiter as you awkwardly walk around with terrible controls trying to talk to people and then brush them off and not do your job at all costs. So if the mayor says he wants some water, well, you could just say, I don't feel like doing that, until you're just browbeaten to actually do your stinking job. I pretty much love this game just for the fact that I could just try to tick people off. However, no one gets too mad, even if you get in their face and just scream at them, which is something that I do a lot in this game. And when you actually start getting into the actual gameplay of it, you'll find out it's one of these disaster-style games where you're just an ordinary person trying to pick up everything, sort of Resident Evil style, like you're a crazy kleptomaniac, and save the lives of all of these people that are trapped in an underwater city that is flooded. Building cities underwater, guys, almost never works out. There's plenty of dry land, you know, that you could build these massive cities. Maybe even in the desert and have water imported in. At least then you're not gonna drown if a pipe breaks. If your like game's overly complex and you think that this is your jam, well then dive in. But sometimes I like simpler games. Sitting Ducks is a 3D action-adventure game similar to Grand Theft Auto if you rip out everything that makes it fun, but with ducks. And the ducks are cute and adorable. This one befriends an alligator, which then he has to do many fetch quests for. Matter of fact, this whole game is completely made up of fetch quests, dodging traffic and trying not to get in anyone's way. You have time limits to control these fetch quests, which means that the only obstacles here are all the traffic that gets in the way. It's based off of a TV show for kids, so I kind of expected to have a very easy game, even though some of these time limits are really tight. Which means it's actually challenging for some adults, at least later on in the game. At the beginning, it's a total snooze fest, but watching these ducks waddle around is freaking hilarious, and it puts a smile on my face, and that's why I kind of like to play it. It sort of reminds me of Howard the Duck, and in the comic book at least, he had a huge arsenal of weapons blowing apart everything. I wonder if there's a game with an alien that can just shoot everything to death. Alien Hominid. This also came out on the Xbox 360 and the GameCube, but most of the time I do play it on the PlayStation 2 because the controls seem to fit the game the absolute best. You have a little yellow alien, you're slicing and dicing a whole lot of FBI agents because, you know what? They're up to no good, as they seem to always be. You also have a charge shot. You can go into the ground to avoid enemies and suck people down. Trying to figure out the patterns of all the mini-bosses is kind of the whole point to the game. The controls are very fast-paced and precise, so you have to be on top of your game at all times or you're going to get a game over really quick. Luckily, it saves after every level, so you could always jump right back in and try and learn it up and down. There's also some insane car chase sequences and tons of mini-games to unlock. This one is adorable from start to finish and completely has me sold. But if you wanted to blow up a whole lot of stuff in a 3D environment, maybe you should try out Sub Rebellion. You better believe I love me some submarine games, and one of the biggest problems with submarines is the fact that they're really hard to control, giant awkward machines. Don't worry, that's not the case here. This one's streamlined and small, and you can blow the ballast to dodge torpedoes that are being launched right at you, and then spin around and blow everything to shreds. Sub Rebellion is definitely the sub game I would have actually wanted to play at the time if I wasn't stuck playing my OG Xbox so stinking much. You could also recover some of the treasures of the ancient sea. I really enjoy playing this game, and not just because I love submarines, but because it's actually good. However, a lot of other people didn't like it so much, which means it can be found ridiculously cheap. So if you want a true hidden gem, this is definitely one to turn to. And if you think being under the water is just too much for you, well, maybe instead you should look up Savage Skies, a game about dragons flying around and blowing up a whole lot of crap. Of course, it's not just about the dragons you fly around here, because I guess you do get a bird too that you can screech at and blow stuff up that way. I guess blowing stuff up on a bird's just as good as blowing stuff up on a dragon, only with a lot more feathers involved. This is one of my favorite flying games I think I ever played. Flying an F-16 is alright, but being on the back of a dragon feels a lot more fun. There's tons of power-ups that you can collect, sort of like Quake 3 style, at least that's how I start feeling when I'm playing the game, and then destroying all of my enemies. I can say I like the idea of mashing up a whole lot of concepts together and just throwing them against the wall and seeing what could be made. And that brings us to our last game, Biker Mice from Mars. This definitely came after the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles thing, where you just are mice on top of motorcycles and blowing apart everything in sight. Of course, it couldn't just be that simple, because sometimes there's some on-foot stages where you have to run back and forth and tediously beat people down. Also, the boss battles here feel kind of ridiculous. The best part about the game is riding the motorcycle, which after you pick up so many of a different item, you can supercharge into a giant motorcycle and blow apart different cat people, because cats are the #1 enemy of mice, therefore they're the #1 enemy in this game. Hey, it doesn't need to make a lot of sense if they got the gameplay fun, which they did for the most part. Just like every single game I talked about today, it's not perfect, but there is enjoyment to be had if you can look past some of the minor flaws. But of course, that's just my opinion. Thanks for watching.
Tomanaka turning on the nitro boost.
That's no crossing ball, Johnny. Big air and big speed.
Tomanaka stealing the lead.
Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I had a great time making it because I got to play some of the lesser known PlayStation 2 games. I also had enough left over here for a whole nother video, and eventually I do plan on doing my top 10 PlayStation 2 games, but it's not going to be what everyone thinks it should be, because I didn't play a lot of the best games for the system. Instead, I sort of played a lot of the crappier ones like I just showed you today. So what is your favorite game that that most people don't talk about for the PlayStation 2. Let me know in the comments down below, and until later, I will see you again.